Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to get into the topic of teens, tweens, and technology. And I added tweens in there because there's kind of this awkward age where parents want to maybe start giving kids cell phones. And I thought it would be a good idea to maybe go over that and talk about some guidelines and maybe some good boundaries to set around that. But I want to start today by discussing why teenagers are so vulnerable on the internet. And my guess is going to be that they have this need for approval. So it stems for them to seek approval. And that's my guess of how it starts. But the other reason would be their underdeveloped prefrontal cortex.
I think you're right on both those counts. And so, in simple terms, an adolescent's brain is characterized by this imbalance. And the imbalance is between the limbic system and the reward systems, which mature earlier compared to the prefrontal cortex, which I think we've talked about in previous episodes, that really it's about age 25, when we think of adolescence ending. And so you have this imbalance. And so, you can see if your reward system and the limbic system, which is the emotional system, is more mature, but yet you can't make rational choices, that's a recipe for disaster, right? Next week, when we talk more about porn use in adolescence, I think that brain imbalance, the imbalance in those systems in the brain really plays into that.
Yeah.
As to the second thing you mentioned, the need for approval, I think there are a couple of things that fall into that. One, as a species, I think we're really, we've evolved to really want to be a member of a tribe, I think. And there are different tribes, often they're religious groups or community groups. And I think as an adolescent, where you're trying to figure out where do you actually place in the world. And so you create this own little tribe of your friends. And I think that becomes really important. And so that approval, I think, getting the approval of your friends, I think I've talked about self-esteem as that internal barometer of how we think the world sees us. And so certainly for an adolescent, your friend group is really the most important group that, you look to them to kind of get your self-definition and how are you doing in the world. So, yeah, I think it's very important for those reasons. We want to be part of a group. It gives us that connection. We don't make very good decisions. We're really driven by our emotions and seeking pleasure. And so I think all of that, plays into the vulnerability. I think that's where we're going with this, the vulnerability that teens have on being online.
Yes. And I think most parents are probably aware of some of the big dangers. Obviously, pornography is a very big concern, and we're going to get more into that next week. But I know there was this big thing in the news about, it was a lawsuit against Facebook for perpetuating eating disorders among teenagers or perpetuating body image issues. And so that is definitely a concern. But parents, hopefully they're aware of things like online predators, which is a whole other topic in and of itself. Also, nowadays, it is so easy to find a support group or to find, I guess, a niche online for anything. So if there's any one thing that you feel really into, you can find a group of people who will share similar interests and beliefs. And that can be a really positive thing if you find something positive, but it can also be incredibly dangerous.
It is. And since you mentioned Facebook, I'm going to mention this documentary that I've mentioned several times. It's called The Social Dilemma. But the important thing about it, like you say, Facebook promoted eating disorders. So Facebook is the platform by which that occurs, but it's really AI, or the artificial intelligence that is behind that. And so if you then do a search on, or you're interested in eating disorders, then the AI is such that it will just lead you down that path,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really hard to get off that path or to see alternative views. And
Yes.
so it's not like someone's at Facebook saying, "Oh, well, let's promote eating disorders."
Right.
It's the algorithms that are used, and so
Yes.
that's going to be true for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up the idea of the online groups, and I've certainly known clients in the past that it happens, say, with mental health issues. And you don't hear much about this anymore, but it used to be called multiple personality disorder, and
Mm-hmm.
now it's called dissociative identity disorder, DID. But I knew of clients who they'd get online and they'd dive into this, and it would become really big in their life. It became their identity, even
Mm.
though they weren't that. It was a way to, one, have community. So
Yeah.
here we were talking about community with the teens. You can get online into anything and have this instant community. But then the drawback to it is that you don't know who you're talking to, really.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Yeah.
no idea who you're communicating with.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
can go online and I can say, yeah, I'm this 15-year-old guy and I'm trying to find some, 15-year-old girl to date. And this happens all the time.
Oh, yeah. Predators.
And yeah, predators. And so I think it's one of the big problems with teens and the internet is the predators.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't know the statistics on this. I was just wondering, if are females more likely to be taken advantage of than males? I'd guess so.
I would guess so.
Um, but I think it happens with males as well,
Mm-hmm.
because you can get, for instance, men who are attracted to men, and they'll easily pose as, a young man or a young lady even, and try and lure or groom, an
Mm-hmm.
adolescent. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. And I think most parents are aware of sexual predators or any type of predator online because that's been around since before social media platforms were big. Online predators were a thing that my parents were aware of and tried to guard me from. But I'm going to do something that I've never done before. I'm going to ask our listeners for some feedback. And if you could email us at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com a list of apps or maybe websites that you're aware of that teenagers use that are problematic. I know a few years ago Snapchat used to be a really, really big problem, but I think they've changed that. I don't know because I don't use Snapchat. I mean, TikTok, YouTube,
TikTok is the big one now, I know.
right. And I have no idea what the regulations are on it. You have a TikTok, apparently, or you did a TikTok.
I can't believe I did that. Yes, Liz, thanks for reminding me. I did a TikTok.
So yeah,
I willingly agreed with Frankie and Jeff to do that.
if if you want to see Mark's TikTok,
Oh, please don't. Oh my gosh.
well,
I
well,
was hoping that would just kind of go away. But
oh no,
I'm sure you can find it on their
Kylie emailed me and said,
oh,
do you guys have an Instagram?" Because
oh my
Mark did a TikTok. Do you guys have an Instagram or, a Twitter account or some sort of,
God.
anyways. So, yeah. Anyways, so, I mean, and I don't think that they're necessarily all bad, but I think they certainly have the potential to be. And so this leads into a really good talking point of deciding what age to allow your kids to use social media. And I would say it's going to depend very greatly on parents' comfort level, maturity of the adolescent, and situation. Because the easy answer to teens in social media or teens in the internet is just don't do it. That's the really easy answer, but that's not going to work for obvious reasons.
I suppose it won't, but that's where I'd like to go. And I think I've mentioned before, I see all the problems with social media, and it's in my adult clients,
Yeah.
the affairs. And if you have an affair with a couple, there's almost always some sort of social media element in there. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's true, I see the negative in it. And I
Yeah.
do acknowledge that for a lot of people, it's positive. But
Mm-hmm.
so as to your question, I think that parents whatever the age is, and you're right that it depends on the maturity of the child, and that's going to be different. The parents are going to know that. But
Yeah.
I think more than that, they need to set up some sort of way that they can have control or oversight. And I think that is a huge mistake that parents make. And I
Yeah.
think we talked about it before, either, just on our own or in another episode, that giving kids phones, I think you have to be so careful with that, because
Yes.
if you give them the phone that then has access, well,
Mm-hmm.
to the world, in fact, on the internet,
Yes.
and there is no oversight, I think that's a huge mistake. If you want your child to have a way to communicate with you, we've talked about there are certain phones that you can
Mm-hmm.
have that's all they let you do. And I think that's a really great option.
I do too.
So in giving phones, I think the mistake that parents make is they say, I'm giving you this phone, and the kid, and I think the parents sometimes think, okay, this is the child's phone.
Mm-mm.
I
No,
don't
it's
think it
not.
should ever, ever, ever be the kid's phone. As a
Mm-hmm.
parent, this is my phone, and I am going to let you use it.
Yep.
And that means that I have control over it. I get to see what's on it, and
Mm-hmm.
I have the password, and all of those things. And I would even go to the point that I get to be the one who loads apps on. I think that as a parent, you can set the password in such a way that apps can't be loaded unless you load them on.
Or just get them what they call it, a dumb phone, where
Right.
it can't do internet. I mean, it's just a flip phone, and all it can do is just text and make phone calls. And it's interesting. So our oldest daughter just turned 9, and she's just starting to get to that age where we're starting to want to be able to communicate with her ways. We're starting now to look into getting a phone for her that we can give to her. It's not going to be her phone. She's not going to have constant access to it. It is going to be a cell phone that we can give to her when she's away from the home, so that if she needs to get a hold of us for whatever reason, she can. And
Yeah.
that's going to be the clear expectation. You do not just get to go grab this phone whenever you want a phone to play with. This is our phone. We're giving it to you strictly for communication purposes. And whatever age, that's going to vary greatly, between
Right.
families, depending on what your circumstances are and the level of involvement and activities your kids are on. But I think that it's just important to set that precedent early on.
Oh, I agree. And the issue of, you're in my home, I'm letting you use this phone, I have control over it. And I
Yes.
have to acknowledge to listeners that my kids are old enough that I did not have to deal with this at all, because
Yeah.
they didn't have cell phones. And it wasn't my youngest, who is 31 now, is the only child who ever had a phone in high school. And it worked out fine. But so I really haven't dealt with this issue, which is a big issue for parents, because a lot of kids have phones, and your own kids are going to come up to you and say, hey, when do I get a phone?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's about control and oversight. And as a parent, you need that
Yeah.
nowadays with
Yeah.
any type of connection to the internet.
Yes, I agree. And so, again, the easy answer to teens and social media is just to tell them flat out no. But I think that can also be a big mistake, because if you just say, no, you can't have a Facebook, you can't have any of these social media platforms, what they're going to do is they're going to find a way at school or somewhere else, and they're going to do it anyways.
You're right.
So I think the better way to handle it is, at an appropriate age, when you feel your child is ready, is to tell them, okay, you can have this social media account, but here are the rules. I get to know your password. We have to be friends. I get to see all your content. I get to approve all your friends. And you set boundaries.
Yes.
And it's important for their protection.
So we go back to how we started the podcast, and that is, their brains are not developed in such a way
Yeah.
that they can make good rational decisions at times.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, the teen themselves is going to feel like they can. It's just so many teens get into trouble this way,
Yeah. Yeah.
with either predators, or like the other thing that we haven't ever touched on, I don't think, but is teens thinking they can take, say, nude photos of themselves and send them to friends
Yeah.
or boyfriends. And at least in Utah, that is really an iffy thing to do, because I think you can be charged with child pornography even
Interesting.
if you're the kid who did it. And so,
Wow.
parents need to be aware of what's going on and what's on their kid's
Mhm.
phone and what they're sending and who they're sending it to.
Yeah.
And otherwise, there can be a lot of trouble.
If your child never tells you you're a terrible parent, you're
You're
probably
doing
doing
something
something
wrong.
wrong. Because that's exactly
Right.
what's going to happen. I mean, all my friends have a phone. How come I don't get a phone? I can't believe you're doing this. This is so unfair. Well, you know what? 15 years from now, they're going to look back and, well, I mean, I doubt they're going to hate you for it 15 years from now because you didn't let them have a cell phone.
And you bring up a really good point, Liz. Our job is not to be our children's friend.
Hmm.
We can be friendly, but you know what? If they say, I hate you, and sometimes I hope they wouldn't say that, or you're a
Hmm.
terrible parent, that's okay. I mean, it's fine.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like you're going to lose them as a child. They'll
Yeah.
be there.
Yeah, I remember saying ridiculous things to my mom, like, "Oh, you're so horrible. Maybe I'll call CPS on you," or something ridiculous like
Uh-huh.
that. And she's like, "Go ahead. You think you've got it bad now? Go ahead. You'll
Yeah.
find out just how bad you got it if you want to go to a foster home." And not that there was no way anyone would have ever taken us from our parents. I mean, it was a
Mm.
bluff. And I can look back on it and think we were really just trying to hurt her, trying to make her feel bad, and trying to
Yeah,
guilt her, and that's a totally normal thing for
it
kids to
is.
do.
It
And
is.
I think it can be incredibly painful and hard for parents to hear, "I hate you," or "You're so bad at this," but you can't take it personally.
Right. It's your job is to protect these kids. At least, when I was growing up, this danger didn't exist. The internet didn't exist.
Mhm.
And so we didn't have to deal with this type of threat. But now this is a real threat.
Yeah. So I want to talk about tablets real quick because
Okay.
tablets are very, very common for kids. And our family was finally able to break away from the tablets for our kids. We finally just said, nope, we're done. And then they came home from school with iPads for e-learning.
Which isn't uncommon nowadays for schools to, send home the iPads because that's their learning platform.
Exactly. And and they do homework, and what I want to talk about is YouTube and even kids YouTube. So YouTube is an incredibly dangerous place because it's so massive. There are not nearly enough regulations.
Right.
And I have never looked into pornography on YouTube, but I would imagine it's extremely easy to find, and you
Mhm.
don't have to look very far at all to find it. That is a very dangerous avenue. So, in order to try to make YouTube more friendly, they put kids YouTube, and supposedly there's more regulation, but I've still heard horror stories of things cropping up in the middle of this fun kids YouTube video. In the middle of it, it suddenly is talking about ways to commit suicide. That's a scary, scary thing. So, I mean, we have a very, very firm rule in our house, even with the iPads. You are not allowed on YouTube,
Right. But
period.
I think I'm pretty sure this is true that you can, if you're the one who has the administrative password, you can control
Hmm.
what apps go on.
Yes.
And there should not, I mean, hopefully there's no scholastic reason to
Oh,
go
there
on
is.
YouTube. Oh, really?
Yes. And I might bring it up with the school administration. And so for some reason on my oldest daughter's iPad, YouTube is blocked, and I haven't done anything to change it. Just last week was an e-learning day for the whole school, and part of the curriculum was YouTube videos, and they're educational, and the teachers pre-screen them so they're safe. But again, these kids have to have access to YouTube. And that's a problem to me. And I'm thinking I'm going to go to the school, or I'm going to go to the teachers and say, this is a rule we have. I am happy to do anything else, or you use any other platform, but YouTube is not allowed in our home because it's just too dangerous.
And maybe they're using it because I suppose it's easy, to
Hmm.
just reference the video, but hopefully they could solve it by downloading what they want to see and then making it available that way. But I agree with you. I think that's dangerous.
Yeah. And it's not that I would have a problem with, like you said, if they downloaded it and made it available. Sure. Absolutely. I mean, at that point, there's obviously the responsibility of the teacher. They pre-screened it. They know it's safe content. Sure. And I myself have played YouTube videos for my kids. It's a great way to listen to music.
Mhm.
I mean, it's great because you can go in there and any song you want to listen to. But the point is I have the control over it and I'm moderating the content. I mean, we'll get into this next week, but it takes one time to be introduced to pornography. That is all it can take to get
Right.
for an addiction to start. And that is so, so dangerous. And it can be slipped in there in the most innocuous way you can think of.
Mhm. Yes.
So let's switch gears now and let's talk about cyberbullying, which sadly is a real problem. And I think the best way to combat that is to put the control in the hands of the parents. But that's not always the case, and it's not always going to be the case with teenagers on the internet. I mean, the reality is cyberbullying, it happens. So tell me your thoughts on cyberbullying.
So I think a couple of things are important. One, I think it's easier to do because you're not necessarily anonymous, but you aren't face to face with the
Yeah.
person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've talked about empathy before. And I believe it's a parent's duty to teach their children empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't, then it's really easy for them to get online and they can't really see the person they're with.
Yeah.
It might be someone they know at school. But so they can say all sorts of ugly things or mean things to this person without any type of feedback, the visual feedback that, oh, what I said was hurtful. And so I think it's really harmful for the person who's doing the bullying because they aren't learning empathy.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're doing it probably says there's a breakdown in the teaching of empathy in their home anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, that anonymity or that perceived anonymity is I can't see you, you can't see me. So I can say really mean things. I think that's real. I think that's a lot of what's behind it. But I think that the more a teen is online, that increases the probability that they might experience some sort of cyberbullying. The mental health repercussions for the teen who's being bullied are very real.
Yes.
Depression, self-image problems, suicidal thoughts, suicidal behavior. It can lead to social isolation, poor academic performance, fear and anxiety. So the ramifications of this are very real and very serious. And so how do you control that? I think one is, being aware of what's going on with your kid.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about, I think in a couple of episodes past, that one of the ways to really have that good connection with your teenagers is to start young and to be able to listen to them with empathy and validation.
Yeah.
Because if you start young, then what you do is you set a pattern that hopefully when the child experiences those things, so, you start young by letting the child know you're going to listen to them and we'll work this out. And then when they're 15,
Mm-hmm.
and they experience some sort of cyberbullying, hopefully they'll come to you
Yeah. Hopefully.
and tell you about it.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen if you don't have good communication with your child.
Mm-hmm.
And so to prepare for that, that starts when the kid's young. You want to have that good open communication with them.
I think one thing that's also important too is we talk about listening to our children, and what you're saying just made me reflect on my own parenting skills and how hard it can be to listen to my child when they are going on and on and on about Minecraft or Pokemon or something I really, really
Yes.
don't care about. And all parents know, they all understand. But, if we tune that out or if we don't listen to that stuff and at least try to be interested and try to engage, then they're going to start coming to us less and less and less as they get older. And so I know it's hard. I know it can be painful and you can be bored to tears, but do it anyways because I
agree.
think your relationship you will thank yourself
More
later.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other thing that I think parents can do that parents often, some parents aren't aware of the small changes that might occur
Yes.
in the emotional lives of their kids. Like, I think sometimes you can see, oh, my child's sad or something's different. And you could even base it on school performance.
Mm-hmm.
Kids up here doing really well, and all of a sudden, boom, they're down,
Yeah.
not getting good grades or not performing well in school. Do not ignore that. Do not ignore those clues or those red flags. Let's call them red flags. Don't ignore the red flags that your kids are giving you and follow up.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you have that good relationship and the good communication, then it makes it easier for you to go and say, hey, I've noticed this.
Yeah.
I really want to talk about it. And all you're doing is you're talking about the behavior. Help me understand what's going on in your world, which then hopefully is the invitation that says, I'm being bullied or this is going on the internet. The child may not even perceive it as cyberbullying, so they probably won't use that word. And so I think that parents are going to have to be perceptive and really understand what's going on and dive into it.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important that they may not recognize it as cyberbullying. And one big problem with teenagers is we talked earlier about their need for approval, their need for acceptance. A lot of times they will allow themselves to be manipulated or ran over or taken advantage of in the name of approval. So I remember as a teenager or as a very young child being so desperate to fit in. And I remember when we moved to a new school when I was in the 4th grade, I got in really quickly with this clique, and I still to this day I have no idea what happened. But for a few weeks I was the fun new kid and I was interesting, and then they decided to just drop me like a sack of potatoes, or they decided I was no longer interested, and I spent years trying to figure out how to regain their approval. And I carried it with me all through high school and even into college, just this desperate need to want to be approved, the need to be liked. And, it's really, really interesting. After I married Curtis, that completely went away because I had the ultimate approval. I had the approval of my spouse. And in a way, it was really, really freeing to me. I remember getting my first job after Curtis and I got married. And you know what? And I said, wow, this feels different. This feels really healthy because I don't feel this desperate need to seek the approval of my peers around me, because no matter what, I have the most important approval. So the point I'm trying to make is approval is so important for teenagers. And if you can just help them understand, life is going to get so much better if you can just get through these painful high school years.
Right. And I just thought of the difference between, say, the 25-year-old brain and the 15-year-old brain, because you're both wanting approval.
Yes.
But the 25-year-old brain, where the prefrontal cortex is more developed, is able to say, I'm not putting up with that behavior.
Yeah.
Whereas the 15-year-old brain isn't able to say, I'm not putting up with that behavior.
Yeah.
And so, it would be easy for the more mature person to see that as some type of bullying.
Yeah.
Whereas that immature person is going to have trouble seeing it that way. And that's why, as parents, we need to step in and we need to guide them. And our job is to protect them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kids will take it to the point of they will ignore bullying because they're being accepted. And I think that's still going to affect their behavior and their performance. And like you said, don't ignore those warning signs.
Yeah, the behavioral red flags.
Yes. Don't ignore those. I mean, your kid. You know when something's different. You know when things have changed. Pay attention to that. And the other thing I want to bring up is if you are the type of parent who doesn't have that relationship with your teenager. And I remember my mother going through that. And in a way, I think it was painful for her that we didn't have that really close relationship where I felt I could go to her when I was struggling. But you have to put those feelings aside. And if you don't have that good, close, emotional relationship where your child can come to you with a problem, find someone who can relate to your child, who can relate to your teenager, that they will open up to. Anyone. It can be anyone that you both trust. Find someone that they can go to, even if it's not yourself. That is
often
it
can be a grandparent.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. A grandparent, but even if it's not, I mean, if it's a teacher, a coach, a church leader, someone in
Right.
your community, an adult that you trust, that your child gets along with, don't be afraid to reach out, because, I mean, anyone who's involved in a community, especially teachers at school, they're not in it for the money.
Right.
Teachers are sadly underpaid. They're in it because they have genuine care for these kids that they're teaching. So
Mhm.
don't be afraid to reach out to them, because really the most important thing is the emotional and long-term health of your teenager.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, so next week we're going to get into youth pornography use, which is a really, really important topic.
It
And
is.
we're going to get into the way it starts and why it's so dangerous for youth, and as well as how to combat that. So
And
stay
it all
tuned.
has to do with your brain, just so you know. That's what's
Yeah.
going on, is that immature brain again. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's a real problem
mhm.
for youth. So we will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.